A decorated war veteran, a quiet life in small-town Pennsylvania, and a mysterious spot on his back he'd ignored for decades. Harold Whitaker thought it was just a scar from his time in Vietnam, until a surgeon gasped in the middle of a routine procedure and everything stopped. What they found beneath his skin wasn't a tumor. It was metal, American metal, and suddenly, 50 years of silence cracked open. What was his body protecting? And what secret had he buried so deep, even his family had no idea? The surgical suite at Mercy General fell utterly silent as Dr. Evelyn Young froze mid-motion, scalpel in one hand, forceps in the other. "What the hell?" she murmured, leaning in. Hal Whitaker lay, face down, unconscious, prepped for what was supposed to be a simple mole excision. But what Dr. Young had just uncovered wasn't skin or muscle, or anything she'd seen in 20 years. Nestled beneath fibrous tissue, something metallic caught the light. It wasn't just embedded. It was cocooned. Nurse Allen stepped back, eyes wide, knocking a tray of gauze off the counter. Metal clattered, but no one moved. From the viewing window, Maggie Whitaker watched, arms folded, mouth tight. She told Hal for years that thing didn't look right. He always brushed her off. "Vietnam," he'd said. "Just an old scar." But scars don't grow, and they don't gleam. "Page radiology, DR," Young said sharply, "and give me a biopsy tray. Now." Everyone snapped into motion. Outside, Maggie leaned against the glass, wedding ring pressing into her skin. She wasn't a stranger to medical drama, nor without her own secrets. But nothing had prepared her for this. What had been living inside her husband for nearly half a century? And was it still alive? The drive home was quiet. Maggie's hand stayed clenched, knuckles white, eyes fixed ahead, jaw set, mind racing. She pulled into their driveway as the sun leaned low over Lake Erie. Their house sat still in the amber light. The porch swing creaked. For the first time in decades, Maggie hesitated before going inside. Hal's boots were by the door. His worn army coat hung where it always had. The house smelled like coffee and pine cleaner. Nothing had changed, but she had. She poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and typed on her phone. "Claire, call me when you can. It's about your dad." The dots appeared, then disappeared. Across town, Claire stared at her screen, heartbeat quickening. This wasn't a message her mother sent lightly. Dr. Whitaker had learned long ago to trust Maggie's instincts. Meanwhile, upstairs, Hal sat on the edge of their bed, bare back to the mirror. He'd seen Dr. Young's fear before. 20 years old, soaked in sweat and smoke, carrying a wounded boy through Quang Tri. But this was different. This wasn't the kind of fear you ran from. This was the kind you carried. He ran a hand across his neck, tracing the bandage. It didn't hurt physically, but something deep in his gut was stirring. Not pain, memory. In the reflection, he looked older. Shoulders stooped, skin thinned. That spot, it had always been there. Or long enough. He remembered brushing it off when Maggie noticed it years ago. Just an old scar, he'd told her. Nothing worth fussing about. But even then, a part of him knew better. Downstairs, Maggie poured out the water. Poured another. Sat down again. The clock ticked. Her wedding photo stared back. The Hal in that frame looked younger, lighter, before secrets, before the silence. She whispered to herself, practicing what to say. And upstairs, Hal closed his eyes. The house around them had never been quieter. The morning after, the house felt off balance. Maggie poured cereal for Emma, their 6-year-old granddaughter. Hal had insisted they keep things normal. He was in his recliner, pretending to read the paper, but his eyes weren't moving. Every now and then, he'd touch the gauze, like he was trying to remember something that didn't want to be remembered. Emma skipped in with her bowl. She glanced at her grandpa. "Grandpa," she said, tilting her head, "your back has a bug." Hal blinked. "A bug?" "Yeah," she said, serious. "Little bumps like a beetle. I saw it when you bent down yesterday. It looked shiny." Maggie froze, fingers tightening on the sink. Hal forced a chuckle. "Just a scar, sweetheart," he said. "Old man stuff." But Emma wasn't buying it. "Scars aren't shiny," she replied, matter of fact. A long pause. Hal turned the page of his paper, though it was upside down. Maggie didn't speak. After Emma left, She picked up her phone. The picture from last week, Hal asleep on the porch with his shirt half untucked, was still there. She zoomed in. The angle caught something under the skin, rounded edges almost symmetrical. Not natural, not benign. She handed the phone to Hal. You want to keep calling this a scar? He looked at the screen, then handed it back. I've lived with it this long. Doesn't mean it's trying to kill me now. Maggie didn't argue. She just looked at him, really looked, and said quietly, but what if it's not done with you yet? He didn't answer. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Hal stood in front of the bathroom, mirror shirtless. He twisted, trying to get a good look over his shoulder. The gauze had come loose. Beneath it, the skin was raised, reddened, and, just barely, shimmering in the low light. He leaned in closer, and for a split second, he could have sworn it pulsed. Dr. Evelyn Young wasn't easily rattled. 22 years in practice had taught her to trust instincts, double-check data, and never speak fear unless necessary. But Hal Whitaker's case gnawed at her. She sat at her desk, drumming fingers against her coffee mug, staring at the pathology report. Non-organic foreign object encased in fibrotic tissue. No signs of rejection. No acute inflammation. Mild cellular adaptation. That part didn't sit right. The human body didn't just adapt to a foreign object for decades. It either attacked it or walled it off. This was something else. She pulled up the scans. The MRI showed a distinct outline, metallic, smooth, manufactured, American. The edges were rounded, almost cradled. Dr. Young paged her colleague in radiology. Ben, can you take another look at this scan? Whitaker case. Yeah, I was about to call you. I ran a contrast test on the surrounding tissue, saw something odd. What kind of odd? The blood vessels around the object, they're not avoiding it. They're growing toward it. She sat back. You're saying it's being fed? I'm saying it's not acting like foreign material. More like an organ. That night, she couldn't sleep. Images looped, her training screaming none of this made sense. At 2 a.m, she opened her laptop and searched old military injury archives. Vague mentions, classified reports of embedded gear, unexplained anomalies. Most redacted. Some vanished. But one thing kept popping up. Project Kestrel. She closed the laptop. The next morning, she requested a deeper biopsy on the tissue surrounding Hal's implant. She also pulled his military file, what little was accessible. Purple Heart. Service in Guangxi, 1972. Discharge under extraordinary medical circumstance. No elaboration. Later, passing Hal in the hallway, she paused. You ever remember being shot in the back? She asked casually. Hal didn't flinch, just looked her in the eye and said, not officially. Then he walked away. And Dr. Young knew she was far deeper than she'd signed up for. Maggie wasn't one for technology. But that night, something wouldn't let go. She sat in their bedroom, lights dimmed, while Hal snored. She held her phone, thumb hovering over the camera app. She wasn't sure what she expected, but around 2:47 a.m., the sheet on Hal's back shifted, nudged from the inside. Maggie leaned in, breath caught. Again, just a twitch, a ripple under the skin, barely visible but unmistakable. She hit record. The movement was slow, almost like a breath, not Hal's but something independent. She kept the camera steady, heart pounding. Another shift, then stillness. Then a soft, imperceptible rise beneath the bandage. It held there, then sank again, as if whatever was underneath had gone back to sleep. She stopped recording. Her hands were shaking. She didn't wake Hal. She sat for a long time, staring at the dim glow of the phone, the video open, thumb just above playback. Morning came gray and quiet. Hal moved slower, posture stiffer. Maggie made coffee, setting it next to his recliner. He gave her a tired smile. You look like you didn't sleep, he said gently. She shrugged. Neither did you. He looked at her then, really looked. A flicker of something passed between them. Guilt? Weariness? Something older. I had a dream last night, he said suddenly. I was in a tunnel. Hot, narrow. Couldn't move my arms. Something was pressing into my spine. Maggie hesitated. Was it a memory? Maybe, he said. Or maybe it's just catching up with me. She nodded, said nothing. Later, when he showered, Maggie pulled the video back up. This time, she watched the full clip, frame by frame. At the 6-second mark, she paused. The light caught a shape beneath the skin. Oval, dark, slightly pulsing. She saved the video to a folder labeled Important. And for the first time since her days as a field nurse, she felt the old chill return, cold, clinical, certain. Whatever this was, it was foreign. And it was waking up. Claire Whitaker had always been the logical one. Clinical, measured, detail-obsessed. She was halfway through charting a post-operative recovery plan when her mother's text came. Call me when you can. It's about your dad. It wasn't dramatic. Maggie never was. But something in the phrasing made Claire set down her pen. By the time she pulled into her parents' driveway 4 hours later, the sun was gone. The house looked the same. Warm porch light, faded welcome mat, wind chimes clinking. But something felt wrong. Maggie met her at the door with a hug too long to be casual. He's resting, she said quietly. He doesn't know you're here yet. Claire stepped inside, pulling off her coat, eyes scanning the room. The living room smelled like Vicks and chamomile. Everything was familiar, too familiar. I need to see him, Claire said, voice clipped. Maggie nodded. Give him a moment. It's been a hard few days. No, Claire said, already moving toward the hallway. He kept this quiet. Again, he doesn't get to decide what I know anymore. I was sitting at the edge of the bed when she entered, hunched, wrapped in a robe. He didn't look surprised. So, he said softly, they called in the doctor. Claire folded her arms. You had a foreign object under your skin for 50 years and didn't think to mention it. He smiled, tired. Didn't think it mattered. It matters to me, she said sharply. It matters to Mom. It matters that you've built this wall and expected us to keep pretending it wasn't there. I looked down at his hands. I didn't build it to keep you out. I built it so nothing else could get through. Claire's jaw tightened. That's not how families work. He met her eyes then, for the first time in years. She saw something cracked behind his calm, something old and haunted. I saw things, he whispered. Things I was never meant to walk away from. Claire sat beside him, anger dulling. Then why have you been carrying it alone? Hal didn't answer, but his silence was surrender. It was just past midnight when Maggie finally opened the old cedar chest. She hadn't touched it in years. It sat at the back of the closet. Hal always called it his junk trunk, but Maggie knew better. She'd watch him slip things inside quietly, deliberately. The hinges creaked as she lifted the lid. Inside, everything was as she remembered. Dog tags, a compass, a yellowed MRE wrapper, a faded photo of Hal and 3 young men in green fatigues. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small iron box. She hesitated, then flipped it open. A folded letter inside. Thick paper, handwritten, ink smudged. The date, November 1999. She began to read. If you're reading this, I didn't make it. There's something I never told you. Not because I didn't trust you. I just didn't know how to live with it out loud. Back in Quang Tri, it wasn't enemy fire. It was one of ours. A young kid. Scared. Panicked. He didn't like how I kept pulling villagers out of the fire zone. Thought I was weak. Said I was going to get us all killed. I stopped him from doing something awful. He shot me in the back for it. They pulled me out, gave me a medal, and no one ever asked what happened. I didn't offer. Maggie, I never told you because I didn't want you to look at me different. But now that thing in my back, it's not just metal. It's a memory I never had the guts to name. And maybe it's time. Maggie folded the letter, hands trembling. She stared at one of ours for a long time. Then at the photograph, those 4 young men frozen. Only one made a home whole, and even that was a lie. Downstairs, the house was silent. Hal was sleeping, but Maggie felt something shift inside her. A weight she hadn't known she'd been carrying suddenly settling. The truth had always been there, just waiting to be read. The call came just after dawn. Maggie picked up on the second ring, heart already pounding. Mrs. Whitaker, your husband's temperature has spiked. He's being moved to intensive care. By the time she reached the hospital, Hal was on oxygen. Monitors chirped. His skin was pale, damp with fever, bandage edges angry red. Nurses worked quickly, adjusting fluids, checking vitals. DR. Young met Maggie in the hallway, brow tight. We ran every test. No infection. No internal bleeding, but the tissue around the object is active. His immune system doesn't know if it's supposed to fight it or protect it. It's overreacting. Maggie nodded numbly. She wasn't surprised, just afraid whatever had stayed quiet for half a century had finally decided it wanted out. Inside the ICU, Maggie pulled a chair beside Hal's bed and took his hand. It felt warm, too warm, but still. It squeezed back faintly. "I'm here," she whispered, brushing a damp strand of hair from his forehead. "You don't have to say anything." But Hal, eyes half closed, whispered anyway. "I remember the smell of diesel and blood. God, the blood." Maggie leaned closer. "They lined them up," he murmured. "Said it would be fast, clean, but it wasn't. I pulled a girl, couldn't have been older than Claire, out of the blast zone. That's when he turned a rifle on me." His breathing hitched. "I didn't tell command. They wouldn't have believed me. We weren't heroes. We were cleanup." Maggie's voice was steady, but low. "You were human. That's more than most can say." Hal opened his eyes, barely. "Did you know I heard your voice?" "Well, they loaded me onto the chopper. I didn't know your name yet, but I remember the way you yelled at the medic. Like you were in charge." She smiled faintly. "I was." Silence settled again. Soft but weighted. Machines beeped. "I never told you," Maggie said suddenly, voice cracking. "I was in Denam. Field nurse. 6 months before we met back home. I saw what they covered up. I saw what they left behind." Hal blinked. A tear slipped down his face. "You knew," he whispered. "I always knew," she answered. And for the first time since the war, neither had to pretend anymore. The knock came just before noon. Maggie opened the door to a man in his late 70s, tall but hunched, wearing a faded bomber jacket with T. Burke stitched above the pocket. His hair was white, hands rough, eyes sharp. "Tommy Burke," he said, tipping his cap. "Is Hal here?" She stared, then stepped aside. Claire was in the ICU room, going over charts. Her eyes lifted. "And you are?" Tommy gave a thin smile. "A friend. From a long time ago." Hal, pale but alert, looked up from the bed. At first, no recognition. Then a shaky breath. "Tommy, I figured I owed you a visit," Burke said, pulling a chair to the bedside. "Heard you got something inside you that won't let go." "Hal chuklet wiakli." "You could say that." Tommy leaned forward, voice low. "I saw it on the news once. 1985. A vet had a casing in his spine for 20 years. They said it was shrapnel, but it wasn't shrapnel, was it?" Hal didn't answer. Claire closed her tablet. "What are you talking about?" Tommy turned to her. "You his daughter?" She nodded. He glanced at Hal, who gave a small nod. So Tommy spoke. "There were 4 of us that day. Hal, me, Owens, and Cortez. Operation Ember Path. Officially, it never happened. We were told to clear out a village. But there were only families. Hal refused the order. Pulled a girl out of the blast zone. One of our own didn't like that. Said he was going soft. Next thing we know, Hal's down. Shot in the back." Claire's face darkened. "And you all just covered it up?" Tommy met her gaze. 2 of us filed statements. They disappeared. Owens died a week later in a chopper crash that shouldn't have happened. Cortez went off-grid in 79. I never stopped thinking about it. But I had kids. A wife. It was easier to let it fade. Hal whispered. It never faded. Claire stood, trembling. "So you all just buried it, to protect your record?" "No," Tommy said. "We buried it because no one would have believed us. Because the truth wasn't convenient." He turned back to Hal. "But maybe now it's time." And in that small, sterile room, truth finally took its first breath. Hal woke to the sound of rain tapping gently against the hospital window. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then the ache in his back reminded him. And everything rushed in. Claire's voice, Maggie's hand, Tommy's face. He turned and saw them both sitting beside him. Claire looked exhausted. Maggie held a thermos, thumb tracing the lid. "You're awake," Claire said quietly. He nodded. A long pause. "I read the letter. The one from the box." Hal didn't flinch. "I never meant for you to carry that." Claire swallowed. Her voice trembled. "You carried it for 50 years. It's time we carry it together." Hal blinked hard. His eyes burned. "I thought I was protecting you," he whispered. Claire shook her head. "You were isolating yourself." He looked at Maggie, who offered a soft smile, weary but warm. "She's right, you know. You've been bleeding in silence since the day I met you. Hal let out a long, shaky breath. I didn't know how to come back. Maggie leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently to his. Then start here. Claire reached in her bag and pulled out the old dog tags. She laid them on the table. You're not alone in this anymore, Dad. For the first time since 1972, Hal Whitaker didn't feel like he had to be. Not the soldier, not the ghost, just a man, finally seen. 3 weeks later, Hal sat on the porch of his house in Erie, wrapped in a wool blanket, a mug of black coffee. The lake was quiet, a gray sheet stretching to the horizon, calm, still. He stared over the water, listening to the wind. A faint whistle echoed from the wind, chimes Maggie had rehung yesterday. They made the place feel lived in. Claire stepped out, 2 envelopes in her hand. VA called, she said, holding one out. They're reopening your case. New info, possible suppression of records. Dr. Young submitted her findings. Burke gave a statement. Hal took the envelope, didn't open it. And the other? Claire held it up. University of Pittsburgh. Veteran Outreach. They want to interview you. Record your story. Firstand Archive. Hal gave a dry laugh. I spent 50 years trying not to talk about it. Maybe that's why it matters now, Claire said gently. You're not the only one who buried something. Hal nodded, quiet for a long time. Then, you going to be in the room when I do? Claire sat beside him. If you'll have me. He glanced at her. Always. Inside, Maggie stood by the kitchen sink, watching them. She didn't interrupt, just listened. Mugs clinking, soft laughter, long silences that finally felt safe. She turned back to the counter and opened the tin box again. Inside were the old letters. Photos, tiny relics of a war that had stretched far beyond its borders and years. This time, she didn't put them away, because this time, the silence was no longer something to protect. It was something to understand. A month later, Hal stood before a small crowd in the Veterans History Room at the University of Pittsburgh. The space was modest, folding chairs, display cases. A camera. Claire sat near the front, arms folded. Maggie, hands gently on her purse, calm but watchful. Hal cleared his throat. The mic clicked. I was 20 when they sent me to Vietnam, he began. Not much older than most of you. He paused, scanning the room. I thought war would be loud. Explosions. Gunfire. Men shouting. And it was sometimes, but mostly it was quiet. The kind of quiet that lives in your bones. He told them about Quang Tri, about the heat, the mud, the impossible choices. He didn't mention names, but he spoke the truth about the girl he'd pulled from the blast zone, about the bullet that didn't come from the enemy, and about the silence that followed him home. No one interrupted. No one looked away. I didn't come back whole, Hal said near the end. Not because of what was done to me, but because of what I kept from the people who loved me. He glanced at Claire, then Maggie. But I'm here now. And that's a kind of healing I never expected to get. When it was over, the room didn't erupt in applause. There was something more powerful in the hush, respect, understanding, a quiet vow not to forget. As the camera stopped rolling, Claire rose and walked to her father. She took his hand. You did good, Dad. Hal smiled, soft and steady. I finally came home.